Did Christianity cause the fall of the Roman Empire? What at first sounds like a ridiculous question, since how can a religion cause the fall of an empire, we will see during the course of this video, might not be such an unfounded question after all. Since we must observe that not long after Christianity became the official state religion of the Roman Empire, did the Western Roman Empire fall, in fact only some 80 years later. So is there a causal relationship? Let us try to be factual here and find evidence that would support this theory, but also evidence that contradicts it, so that we maybe can find out if and how much Christianity contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire. I am fully aware that this will be a controversial video. I have noticed that the videos in which I criticize early Christianity are always the videos with the worst like to dislike ratio. I can only assume that this is because many devout Christians watching these videos feel attacked. Let me then clarify that when I criticize Christianity in the Roman Empire, I criticize early Christianity and not current day Christianity. Christianity from 1600 years ago was a very different beast to what this religion has become in our modern times. Present-day Christianity has become a quite peaceful religion, and therefore my critique should be seen in a historical context, as it was in the late Roman Empire and not as it is now. That being said, let's start. We all know that Rome was founded in 753 BC, according to legend, by Romulus and Remus, and fascinatingly, archaeological evidence from the area around the Palatine Hill actually supports that time as a founding date. Rome was since its earliest days heavily influenced by the Greeks, and so the Romans adopted the same polytheistic religion that the Greeks had. Therefore, all the Roman gods were basically copies of the classical Greek gods, just with different names. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera was Juno, Artemis was Diana, and so on and so forth. For hundreds of years the Romans worshipped these deities during the time of the Roman kings, during the early, middle and late Republic, and during the first centuries of the empire. The classical Greco-Roman polytheistic religion was the main religion of the empire. But in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, new religions rose to power. One of these was the cult of Mithras, which was especially popular amongst soldiers. Another one was the cult of Sol Invictus, also very popular amongst soldiers, and Aurelian himself tried to make this the new dominant religion of the empire in the late 3rd century. And of course, Christianity. Christianity was especially popular amongst the lower classes since it promised deliverance from the sufferings of the current life by an eternal afterlife in perfect harmony. Understandably, this appealed to the lower classes that normally didn't enjoy the best of lifestyles. It was also very popular amongst women since abortion was a sin in this faith, whereas the traditional Roman religion did not care a lot for the life of newly born infants. In fact, many newborns were discarded, as archaeological bone findings indicate, a really cruel and brutal practice in the Roman Empire. Also, Christianity taught equality and that all human life was precious. Therefore, it quickly rose in prominence. However, contrary to the cult of Mithras and Sol Invictus, which acknowledged the other religions and also the power of the state, Christianity was much more absolutistic in that only the power of the one God was acknowledged. This created a lot of tension with the Roman authorities, which unloaded itself quite often in widespread persecutions of Christians. This would turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes that the Romans ever had committed. Because already by 312 AD, Christianity was put on an equal footing by the Emperor Constantine after his famous victory over his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. after that decisive date of world history, Christianity would rise ever more quickly in importance. Especially the Eastern Roman emperors from their new Christian capital of Constantinople would push the adoption of this religion with great intolerance for the old Roman ways. Constantine's son, Constantius II, already issued laws abolishing the old pagan rites and had the old temples closed in especially the larger cities of the empire. Of course, this was not really often enforced, since especially in the West the majority of people were still pagan. With the short exception of the reign of Julian, most Eastern Roman emperors were now pushing the adoption of this new religion, often with draconic laws. This culminated in the Edict of Theodosius of 384 AD, which officially made Christianity the new state religion of the Imperium Romanum. And only some 90 years later, the Western Roman Empire fell. Coincidence? And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And we have a new Sol Invictus supporter, Patrizio. Thank you so much, Patrizio, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. We also have a new Kaisar supporter, Gordon SH24. Thanks also so much, Gordon, for your awesome support. I cannot thank you people enough, and of course I thank everyone who is supporting this channel either via Patreon, via YouTube membership or via PayPal donations. Gratias tibiago amici. Since time immemorial, there was an ancient prophecy in the Roman Empire that as long as the holy flame was burning in the temple of Vesta in the Forum Romanum of Rome, the Roman Empire would never fall. For the last time, the flame of Vesta burned in AD 394 under the Western Roman Emperor Eugenius, who was very tolerant towards paganism and was suspected to be a secret pagan himself. But after Eugenius and his Magister Militum Arbogast were famously defeated at the Battle of the Frigidus River in 394, Theodosius ordered all pagan temples of Rome closed, and thus was also the order of the Vestal Virgins dissolved and the flame of Vesta extinguished forever. So is it then just a coincidence that not long afterwards the giant misfortunes for the city of Rome and for the Western Empire would start? Let us first look at the arguments that contradict this theory. First, it must be noted that later very successful Roman emperors were Christians. Justinian and his very able general Flavius Belisarius were Christians, and Belisarius achieved incredible victories, coming close to restoring the former extent of the Roman Empire. Or Basil II, who also managed to turn the tide and to greatly increase the extent of the Eastern Roman Empire when it had been in decline for hundreds of years before that, was also a devout Christian. So we must note that Christianity did not lead to a decline in martial vigor. Sometimes the religious zeal could even bring victories, as noticed especially in the battles of Constantine. It is said that the Christian zeal of Constantine's troops brought the victory against Licinius. Although, of course, we must be careful with such accounts because they mostly come from Christian writers such as Eusebius or Lactantius. It must also be noted that during the time of the late Roman Empire, many Christians served in the armies, and many of the foederati, the allied barbarian soldiers of Rome, were in fact already Christians. It must also be noted that Stilicho, Constantius III, and Majorian, who all managed to defend and stabilize the Western Roman Empire, were Christians. Especially in the time of Majorian, the largest part of his armies were Christian foederati, and they achieved great victories. So we must note that the Christian Roman armies of the late empire were not less effective than pagan ones. But Christianity did weaken the empire, however, in other ways than we would normally expect. One very noticeable effect was that the intolerance of Christianity towards paganism often led to violent clashes, and thus to a growing polarization of society, especially in the Eastern Empire. For example, fanatic Christian zealots stormed the Serapeum of Alexandria in 392 AD and destroyed many ancient statues and temples. There was severe fighting and killing between Christians and pagans. We can thus see that the transformation from pagan to Christian empire was not in all places a peaceful one. Violent clashes like these occurred also in other large cities, especially of the Eastern Roman Empire. But in that process, old societal values were upended and thus societal cohesion weakened. This polarization of society was of course not beneficial in a time in which the barbarian invasions would start. Instead of unifying behind a common banner, the Romans often fractured into two opposing camps, thus playing right into the hands of the Germanic invaders. Another big effect of Christianity, which was described by the admittedly not quite neutral Ammianus Marcellinus, having been a pagan himself, was that Christianity might have led to a reduction of new conscripts into the Roman army, since many now preferred an ecclesiastical career as monks or priests instead of risking their lives for the Roman Empire. Why should they fight for an earthly empire if there is eternal bliss in the afterlife? So while Christianity apparently did not reduce the martial zeal of the soldiers, it might have led to a reduction in new conscripts for the Roman army. Another effect that Christianity certainly did have, and this is attested by Emperor Maiorianus himself, who was a Christian, is that it led to a drop in birth rates. Maiorianus addressed this in one of his famous laws, the Novella Maioriani 6, titled Holy Maidens, Widows and Their Succession. Apparently, many Christian women were taking up religious vows of chastity in order to protect the family wealth, so that it would not be passed on in dowries when marrying. But this practice of course led to a decline in births. Maiorianus sought to address this problem by forbidding this practice. However, as we know, this came quite late in AD 458, and Maiorianus did unfortunately not reign long enough. Therefore, this law did not have an effect on the birth rates. So we can see, while in some regards Christianity could even increase the zeal of the Roman army, in other regards it led to less recruits and to a growing polarization of society. Thus, to sum it up, I would argue that it is wrong to say that Christianity caused the fall of the Roman Empire. But it is certainly correct to say that it did contribute in some form to the fall. And one of our high-ranking YouTube members, Sobek, Lord of the Four Corners with the rank of Kaiser, has a question. High-ranking YouTube or Patreon supporters can ask me questions that I then answer as detailed as possible in the videos. Our new Sol Invictus supporter Patrizio also has a question which I will answer in the next video. Sobek's question is, what are your thoughts on Emperor Julian and his attempts to restore paganism? Well, Sobek, I have a lot of thoughts on Julian, as you can imagine, for he is, together with Majorian and Aurelian, one of my favorite Roman emperors, and for good reason. For one, he was the last Roman emperor to achieve some quite impressive victories in Gaul, decisively defeating the Franks and the Alemanni, which would be the last great victories of the Roman Empire in Gaul, and this without any prior military training. Only 50 years later, the Roman border defenses would be overrun by Germanic invaders for good. Julian was also very educated in different fields, but especially in philosophy, for he was a devout Neoplatonist, learning from the teachings of Maximus of Ephesus. It was through these teachings that he renounced Christianity and became a pagan. He thus strived to restore the ancient pagan religion of the Roman Empire, and to weaken Christianity. And he quite possibly would have achieved this task, since during his reign, so from 355 until 363, especially the West was still more pagan than Christian. And even in the East, Christians probably still were below 50% of the total population. However, he also made some mistakes here in my opinion. His approach was too fast, too hasty in execution, and I will talk more about it in future videos on his person. But his biggest mistake was simply not reigning long enough. His attack on Persia, while understandable in some form, was dangerous, and instead of strengthening his still young rule and issuing more laws for the restoration of the old pagan rites, he prematurely set out on a campaign against Persia. He maybe wanted to legitimize his reign even in the eyes of the Christians by becoming a second Alexander the Great, and initially his campaign went well. He might have even taken Ctesiphon, but his grand ambitions proved to be his downfall. On this campaign he was mortally wounded, according to one account, while not wearing his armor. Had he lived longer, paganism might have seen a great comeback in a renewed form, but with him died the hopes for the old religion. Subsequent tries to restore paganism, 30 years later under Eugenius, and even some 100 years later under Antiquity, did not materialize, and so with him, truly, the old world also died. And if you are interested to learn more about paganism's long and slow death in the Roman Empire, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in how Antiquity would have almost reopened the Temple of Jupiter in Rome as late as in AD 470, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene valete.